Welcome to The Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with a look at the main stories in the global economy. Coming up today, Troika-inspired privatizations worry Cypriots. And as Venezuela commemorates Chavez, the masses continue to struggle. First, a look at the headlines. The European Union will consider sanctions against Russia if there's no de-escalation in the Ukraine crisis by Thursday. French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said we must return to dialogue and to bear in mind that Ukraine should work with Russia and the EU. He also stated that measures against Russia could include restrictions on visas, the assets of individuals, and existing discussions on economic ties with Russia. Meanwhile, Russian lawmakers are working on a draft law to allow the confiscation of assets belonging to European or US companies if sanctions are imposed. Russia sold a record $11.3 billion in foreign currency to support the ruble after the market reacted with panic to military action in Ukraine. The central bank on Monday had indicated it was prepared to make major interventions and would assess the market on a daily basis. By Wednesday, pressure on the Russian currency and stocks had largely subsided. The benchmark MySec stock index was 1.6% lower, while the ruble edged down 0.2% against the dollar. The greenback traded at 36.135 against the ruble, down from the all-time high of 37 hit Monday, which prompted the central bank to raise rates. Beijing restated its 7.5% growth target for the world's second largest economy in 2014, but signaled concern over reaching it. At the legislators' annual meeting, Premier Li Keqiang said China needs stable growth to ensure jobs. Li called for a balanced monetary policy, indicating the government might loosen credit to boost the economy. But China is likely to have a tougher time meeting the goal this year as its economy matures and global demand for its exports comes under pressure. A lower growth target might have also made it easier for Beijing to push through reforms even at a short-term economic cost.
We must keep economic development as the central task and maintain a proper economic growth rate. On the basis of careful comparison and repeatedly weighing various factors as well as considering what is needed and what is possible, we set a growth rate target of around 7.5%.
The White House offered a tax and spending plan that was largely absent of lofty new policy goals. President Barack Obama's $3.9 trillion budget focused on targeted measures, including tax increases on upper-income Americans and companies. It also called for spending increases for education and infrastructure projects, and included proposals to aid low-income workers and the unemployed. Though the proposed measures stopped well short of Obama's first-term ambitions, they received a chilly reception from Republicans on Capitol Hill.
In my State of the Union address, I laid out an agenda to restore opportunity for all people, to uphold the principle that no matter who you are, no matter where you started, you can make it if you try here in America. This opportunity agenda is built on 4 parts: more good jobs at good wages, making sure that we're training workers with the skills they need to get those good jobs, guaranteeing every child access to a world-class education, and making sure that our economy is one in which hard work is rewarded. The budget I sent Congress this morning lays out how we'll implement this agenda in a balanced and responsible way.
And Brazil's worst drought in decades is decimating crops, but breathing new life into battered commodity markets. Forecasters who previously called for record harvests cut production estimates that may translate into higher costs for consumers later in the year. Futures prices for the Arabica coffee variety are up 67% since the start of the year, while raw sugar prices have risen 8%. Soybeans, which have been affected by drought in some areas and too much rain in others, also are up 8%. Some experts say the drought in Brazil, the world's biggest grower and exporter of coffee and sugar, is likely to have ripple effects beyond the commodity markets. Privatization of semi-governmental organizations in Cyprus may offer the small island nation much-needed cash, but Cypriots view the measure with great skepticism. Daniel Roth has more in this report.
After a revote this week, the Parliament of the Republic of Cyprus approved an amended version of a bill to privatize semi-governmental organizations as workers stopped labor in protest. This comes after a vote late last week in which the Cypriot parliament rejected the measure by a slim margin. The law privatizes the country's 3 large public companies with the aim of raising $1.3 billion to pay down some of the debt by 2018.
If we sell our ports, our telecommunications, our electricity, we are going to be destroyed. We see that in other countries of European Union, that though this didn't bring the results that they want. They brought even worse results.
The lender group known as the Troika, consisting of the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, had set a March 5th deadline for agreeing on the privatization in order to continue with plans, a year after Cyprus received $13.77 billion.
Troika says there is no choice, but this is the option of the Troika, not of the employees. We believe that the government, which has already received positive feedback from the Troika about the course of the economy and the debt, could have at least renegotiated the postponement of this privatization plan.
According to the government, the new version addresses concerns about the lack of job protection for more than 5,000 and Parliament's limited role in the privatization of once public institutions. The country is looking to give off an image of stability, and some see this as a way to curb the debt, which is close to $25 billion, nearly 110% of its GDP.
We move on now to Venezuela, which remembers its former leader Hugo Chavez on the first anniversary of his death. But ordinary people suffer a lack of basic foodstuffs, rampant inflation, and an economy that is increasingly paralyzed. More in the following report.
Long queues outside supermarkets are an all too common sight in Caracas these days. People wait for 1, 2, or even 3 hours to buy basic foodstuffs, which are in short supply in Venezuela.
I'm queuing to buy toilet paper, flour, butter, whatever there is in the shop.
And sometimes, after hours of waiting, people still leave empty-handed.
I came to see if I can find some products, but from what I can see, there's nothing but a queue.
Despite owning the world's biggest proven oil reserves, the central bank says that 1 out of 4 basic products is unobtainable or hard to find in Venezuela. These shortages, along with a 56% inflation rate and soaring crime, have brought thousands into the streets in recent weeks for protests that have often turned violent.
It's become very hard to find dollars because the state has cut off the currency sources in the private sector. On the other hand, there's a fall in production of the expropriated public factories, which means there's a shortage of supplies. And all this means there's no local production or stable imports, which leads to fewer products and more shortages.
But the socialist legacy of the late President Hugo Chavez is still strong here and has tempered protests in some working-class neighborhoods like this one. Chavez set up supermarkets with state-subsidized goods sold to local residents at much lower prices, making them less likely to blame the government for Venezuela's dire economic crisis.
Having this place has been very good for us because it gives a lot of benefits to those living in this area.
With no quick fix to Venezuela's economic woes, these benefits will be increasingly precious in the weeks and months to come, even though everyone has to wait their turn.
And now for more on Hugo Chavez in Media Watch with Daniel Roth. So Daniel, I understand the first story comes from Haaretz, Israeli newspaper.
Yeah, so today is the 1-year anniversary of Chavez's death.
Yeah.
So he died exactly a year ago, and it was a huge deal worldwide, and particularly in Venezuela. But Haaretz today was running some of the numbers and kind of giving us an idea of where things sit economically.
Right.
And you can see under Chavez from 99 to last year, they went from 16 government agencies to 36 government agencies.
Okay.
Salary expenses increased by 125%.
Salary expenses in terms of
public
right,
salaries.
Okay.
Civil servants went from 900,000 to 2.5 million, or just under.
Okay.
So one of the big things that Chavez did was expand the scope of the public sphere,
Right.
which he was basically in a big way taking the fact that Venezuela is oil rich and using it as a basis to make socialist reforms. And he did so on a number of fronts, working on education. 2 million people now have access to education, to higher education that they didn't have.
Right.
He had housing programs, and there's now 40,000 communal kind of cooperative councils, democratically run councils that work in neighborhoods and in companies.
Right.
So he was really taking all of this money and putting it into the public sphere to try to push forward these things. Healthcare, one of his big programs was putting hospitals in rural areas. So taking money and putting it into the public sphere in order to make these reforms, these major reforms. And Oliver Stone, in 2009, a couple of years before he died, went to South America, went to Venezuela, and sat with Hugo Chavez and a number of other South American leaders.
Right.
And this documentary he made called My Friend Hugo, is going to air on Venezuelan TV today on the 1-year anniversary of his death. And it's a film, well, we'll talk about it in a second, but Oliver Stone really talks about what he sees as the real legacy of Chavez.
Right.
But why don't we take a look at the trailer, at a piece of the trailer.
Let's see it. Right.
The Venezuelan president has become more dangerous to the U.S. than Fidel Castro ever was.
He's more dangerous than bin Laden, and the effects of Chavez's war against America could eclipse those of 9/11.
Who is Hugo Chavez? Where did he come from?
He was literally born in a mud hut and grew up in poverty. And this affected his view of Venezuela, as well as ultimately his lifelong mission to transform the country.
He's as much of a threat to the system as Castro was. He's a great example. If he succeeds, it'll be the first time in Latin American history, except for Castro, where he's led an entire region away from the United States economic controls.
Now, my initial reaction to this, being a South American originally myself, you see obviously the people and they're very happy with him, and there's this euphoria. It's populist policies, though. Can Venezuela continue on this rant, so to speak?
Well, look, there's a number of problems, as we heard in the video before the trailer. Inflation is at 56%,
right.
Which, by the way, it reached its highest over 100% in '96 before Chavez came to power. But there's shortage of things from milk to toilet paper to all these things. Most people say that a large ingredient in the success that Chavez had was Chavez himself. A lot of people were absolutely willing to listen to him speak for hours on end.
He did speak for hours on end.
Right, and people really loved him for it. And these kinds of the major changes, reorganizing communities, reorganizing workplaces, the kinds of things he was doing. It's not so easy to do when you're not a charismatic guy. And what it seems like is Maduro is not that charismatic. And so he won his last election by a very slim margin.
So we're saying basically the money, so to speak, from the oil revenues is not enough to carry all these reforms. Obviously, the fact that Chavez was who he was and that people loved him, they could actually identify with him, and he identified with them, is what allowed for him to make all these reforms. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's a guy who really, he came from the people, he spoke to the people, and he really knew what he was doing in terms of communication, something that it seems Maduro doesn't really have down.
Okay.
And actually, there's an interesting piece in Voxy, which is an online news source aimed at Latin American people who their first language is English, actually.
Okay.
So it's a funny top 6 list. Maybe they don't think it's funny. I thought it was kind of funny,
Right.
but it's top 6 reasons not to invite Chavez for dinner. And they mention one of them is he talked for hours and hours and hours, and you don't want a dinner guest like that. Like these kinds of things. He said he kept very bad company. Gaddafi was someone who he met with, and
Right,
you don't want Gaddafi showing up for dinner.
Right. Okay.
Anyways, there's this funny top 6 list, and it speaks actually to, when you look at Stone and Voxy, you can see the kind of 2 different narratives about Chavez that are out there. And you can see that there are many people very happy and many people very angry.
Okay, well, thanks on that happy and angry note, Daniel Roth. We're going to have to go out here. Thank you very much for joining us today. Chavez's, day of rest, I suppose. Join us again tomorrow. Send us your comments in the meantime, and continue enjoying your day.